Trade rumors continue to swirl around the Vancouver Canucks, but how much truth is there to the rumors? Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks is here to talk about that and how the team gets back on track, coming up next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is great to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canucks, Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, not the easiest time for the Canucks right now. A lot of trade rumors going around between Pettersson and Miller. Is there fire behind all this smoke?
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of fire. I think there's too many warning signs to ignore here. And obviously, Bruce Boudreau comes out earlier this week, and he's talking about their fractured relationship prior to him even becoming the head coach, which is going back to, 3 years ago now. And then obviously Miller, he shoves Pettersson in practice. Most people kind of brushed off at the time, but just based on the history from before, you kind of knew, and their relationship was questioned in this market. When something like that happens, to me, it felt like there was a little bit more than, this is just practice here. Then obviously Miller, his indefinite leave from the team. No one knows why that went down. But of course he comes back, and Pettersson goes from, playing phenomenally in Miller's absence to having now 0 points in 6 games. But Gil, it's not just Elias Pettersson who's struggled recently. It's JT Miller too. And I think last night against the Ottawa Senators is a perfect example. Pettersson, his defensive floor is higher. He lacks the juice offensively when he's struggling. He's not as fast. He's not as quick. He's not as cerebral with the puck. But the defensive floor is there. Whereas JT Miller, it was the last 2 Senators goals in last night game were completely on JT. He just floats through the neutral zone, loses Josh Norris, who scores a short-handed goal. You got to have your man there. And then in overtime, he just gets absolutely walked by Jake Sanderson, who albeit is an amazing skater. But it was another instance where Miller looking very lackadaisical in the back check, and talking Rip Miller after the game. He said, on the Josh Norris goal specifically, that was Millsy's guy. He's got to have him. So both players have struggled a lot right now. You get Quinn Hughes coming out and talking about, not beating around the bush, and him believing the situation's workable. But something's got to change for the Vancouver Canucks, because right now it does not seem workable. It can change quickly. I'm still holding out hope that it can change, but right now it's not pretty.
How much of this is chemistry and how much of this is talent?
Oh man, I mean, it's more so chemistry than talent. I think most people know that, JT Miller, I believe over the past 5 seasons, he's top 15 in scoring for sure. He's pushing the top 10. I believe he was 12th last I checked. And Elias Pettersson coming into the season has 412 points in 407 games. So both players are immensely talented, right? Elias Pettersson had a 100-point season 2 years ago. JT Miller 100 points last year. That is very tough to do, even though scoring is going up in today's NHL. It's pretty damn hard to hit 100 points. So it does seem to be a chemistry thing. And again, the whole story about them being at odds to each other just, took more turns this week based on what Rick Tocchet was doing on the power play. He would have his first unit. He would have his second unit, which has a lot less talent. And he would just swap Pettersson and Miller on the first unit and have the other one play the second unit. It's just bizarre stuff. Like, what team has an 100-point player playing on the second power play unit? And not just that, but then swapping with his teammate in the same spot. Like, it's a bizarre situation. And, Tocchet gave a very mundane answer. Like, we're just trying different things. But, the power play ever since Miller has come back has struggled too. So, again, it's a mess, Gil, and again, never a dull moment in Vancouver.
So how do you solve this? I mean, what is the simplest way to smooth this over and get the team back on track?
Yeah, I think the most simple way. Kyle and I were joking that the team used to go in Vegas and have a good time, but obviously that didn't help against the Sens after they lost in Vegas on Thursday night, losing into Ottawa on Saturday. But I mean, the simplest answer is that it's got to come from within, and these guys just figure it out. They have been teammates for 5 years now, and into their 6th year together, I believe. And they both, they've had great NHL careers on the same team. So I have a hard time believing that it's just suddenly unworkable and that it can't ever work again. But that being said, like if this persists for a month, 2 months into the trade deadline, you do start to wonder if a move is going to be made. Miller will be 32 in March. Pedersen obviously just signed that massive contract and, one of the highest paid players in the NHL, but this is the only year of that deal where he doesn't have a no move clause. So he can veto a trade after this season, but this is the 1 year you could trade him. But I think with the Canucks, if you do trade Miller or trade Pedersen, odds are you are not winning those trades. So again, the easiest solution is that they figure it out. They band together. They do what they need to do to get along, and the talent comes back through because these are both immensely talented players who are obviously going through it for whatever reason right now.
What are some of the other reasons for this recent losing streak besides the obvious tension in the locker room?
I mean, it's funny. I want to give a different answer, but it is kind of the Stars right now, Gil. Honestly, I mean, it's situational by game, but the Vegas game, for instance, the Canucks, it was the second leg of a back-to-back. They came out flying against Vegas, and then Vegas kind of came back into that game. But in that game, you had great goaltending from Kevin Lankinen. The defense did a pretty good job of limiting chances, and the depth stepped up and scored, right? You had Teddy Bluger scoring. That fourth line with Heinen, Sherwood, and Bluger was looking real good. The reason they lost to Vegas is because their stars sucked. Pedersen had a bad game. Miller had a bad game. Besser had a bad game. And going into the game against the Senators, again, Pedersen has 6 points or 0 points in 6 games since Miller came back. Miller has a couple points, but he's just not looking right. He's trying too hard. And Besser had, no goals in 5 games before scoring in Ottawa on Saturday night. So it has largely been the Stars against Ottawa on Saturday night. Kevin Lankinen lets in 5 goals and 22 shots, but you got some defensive breakdowns between, JT Miller and whatnot. I would say the other reason why the Canucks have struggled is just the lack of offensive output. They are dead last in the NHL over the last month since about November 19th in terms of shots on net. They've gone outshot by nearly 100 shots in that span. That is also league worst. So they're not generating offense, and a big part of it is when Quinn Hughes isn't on the ice or doesn't have the puck, this defense really struggles to move the puck up the ice.
Do you think they will look to add another puck-moving defenseman before the deadline?
I think they will, but I've had this debate with Kyle on Locked On Canucks, and what you've seen Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford do in the past is reward teams when they're playing hard. And this team, again, the depth's performing fine, but as long as Miller and Pedersen are mired in these slumps, you can't have 2 of your best players struggling like this and expect to do much. So I do think they'll add. Jim Rutherford was on After Hours on Hockey Night in Canada last week and said this team needs to add a couple of players. So it certainly sounds like he wants to make a move. There is a glaring need to add a defenseman, maybe even 2 to this roster. There's some talk about insiders about adding a top 6 forward, but adding another puck moving defenseman is 100% the top priority for this group. I mean, they got pretty good depth on the wings. If the star power can figure it out, they're going to be good. But this defense, man, oh man, they really struggle to move the puck when Quinn Hughes isn't playing with it.
World Juniors start later this week. A few Canuck prospects involved. Who do you have your eye on?
Well, I think for me, it's first and foremost Tom Willander. I know Sori Minio on Team Canada is a nice story, and he's had a really nice ascension since being drafted in the 3rd round a couple of years ago. But for me, it's Tom Willander because that's the guy who could theoretically come in and make a difference for the Canucks while they're in this contention window. I say contention window because they haven't played even though they haven't played like it this year. But I believe they were a Stanley Cup contender coming into the season. Oh man, sad times, Skill. How are the Islanders doing though, by the way? Never mind, we won't get into that.
We don't want to go there.
But for me, Tom Willander, I really liked how he looked at the World Juniors last year. I think in terms of what he's doing at Boston University this year, his game has taken another step forward, and obviously has a bigger role there as well. So Tom Willander, again, right shot defenseman, it's a huge need on this team. If this guy looks like he's ready to play, I think the Canucks are going to give him a shot. Maybe not this season, but certainly next season.
Going to be interesting. I know you'll have your finger on the pulse of the Canucks for the rest of the season. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Yeah, there you go. Again, Gil, always appreciate you having me on here, even though I'm always 10 to 50 minutes late, wiping ass and making things happen over here in the Beggs household. But you can find Locked On Canucks on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're starting to see the subscribers tick up, the reviews coming in, man. We really appreciate it. Aside from that, you can follow me at Trev Beggs on Twitter, Trev Beggs on Instagram, and my co-host Kyle Bowen, Bhawan. He's on social a bit more than I am, but you can find him on Instagram as well.
All right, Trevor, thanks so much. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling, and hockey fans, you can use your knowledge of the sport of hockey and your favorite team to find some exciting opportunities on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.